Hello. Welcome to my channel, and we continue with interesting stories based on history, anthropology, linguistics, philosophy, and all the possible AIs that sometimes leave us amazed. My motivation for making these videos is, I would give 100% of what I know for 1% of what I don't know. So, let's begin, and blessings to you who are still listening. If you've already seen the video about the city of Ur in the time of Abraham, we'll continue along those lines. I've been thinking about the linguistic groups of the Canaanite region these days, where many human groups arrived and lived in ancient times. So, I started researching. I invite you to continue traveling through those lands with your imagination. But there's something Western society must understand. We cannot and should not attempt to analyze and understand Middle Eastern history with a Western mentality, with the principles and values we know: moral, ethical, religious, and evolutionary. And to understand a bit of antiquity, the most accurate tool today is linguistics. The type of writing and languages like Aramaic, for example, allow us to learn more about those groups and better understand the present in the 21st century. The Canaanite region, which roughly corresponds to the Mediterranean Levant, present-day Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and parts of Syria and Jordan, was a true mosaic of peoples and languages in ancient times. I'll give you a brief overview of the language groups. Northwest Semitic languages, the main ones in Canaan. Canaanite is a conjunction of these languages: Phoenician, Ancient Hebrew, and Moabite, among others. Ancient Hebrew was part of the Canaanite group of Semitic languages, dating from the time of Abraham and spoken by the ancient Israelites who followed the prophet. Phoenician, language of the coastal cities of Lebanon and northern Israel. Moabite, Ammonite, and Edomite, languages very close to Hebrew, spoken by neighboring peoples in Transjordan. Aramaic, although initially Syrian, it eventually became the lingua franca in Palestine from the 8th century BC, and by the time of Jesus was in common use alongside Hebrew. Aramaic later expanded greatly and became the lingua franca throughout the region, even by the time of Jesus. Ugaritic, from the city of Ugarit, in present-day Syria, a language related to Canaanite, famous for its mythological texts. Non-Semitic languages present in the region. Egyptian, not native to Canaan, but due to Egypt's strong influence in the area, it was used in diplomacy and administration, as evidenced by the Amarna letters of the 14th century BC. Hittite and Luwian, spoken in Anatolia, the region corresponding to Turkey and the western and southern Mediterranean Sea in the 21st century, but with commercial and political contacts with Canaan. Ethnic and cultural diversity. Canaanites, Amorites, Jebusites, Hurrians, Philistines, the latter of Aegean origin, and many others settled and mingled in Canaan. Each contributed its own language, traditions, and writing styles, turning the region into a cultural melting pot. The interesting thing is that, despite this diversity, the Canaanite Semitic group predominated and left a legacy that reached Biblical Hebrew and Phoenician, the language that gave rise to the alphabet we use today. The historical question of Palestine. In the Bronze Age and early Iron Age, the region called Canaan included city-states inhabited by Canaanites and other Semitic peoples. Over time, the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, where Hebrew was the primary language, were consolidated. However, different peoples coexisted in Palestine. The Jebusites in Jerusalem, the Philistines on the coast, with Aegean roots, the Hurrians, the Arameans, among others. The term Palestine was popularized by the Romans after the Jewish revolt, 2nd century AD, when they renamed the region Syria Palestina to weaken the Jewish identity linked to the land of Israel. So, what did the people of ancient Palestine speak? In biblical times, primarily Canaanite Hebrew, the language of the Hebrew Bible. In Persian and Hellenistic times, Aramaic became the everyday language. In Roman times, the time of Jesus, Aramaic, liturgical Hebrew, and Koine Greek coexisted. That is to say, it is correct to say that Hebrew was the original language of the ancient Israelite peoples of Palestine, but it was not the only one, as the region has always been a multicultural mosaic. And after these concepts and clarifications, you will be able to better understand what I will describe next. Middle and Late Bronze Age, 2000 to 1200 BC. At this time, the region was known as Canaan. The population was mostly Canaanite Semites, who spoke related languages. The predominant language was a common Canaanite, ancestor of Hebrew, Phoenician, and Moabite. Other peoples, Amorites, also Semites, Hurrians, not Semites, and Egyptians, who dominated the region politically and militarily. The Amarna letters, 14th century BC, show us how the Canaanite kings communicated with Egypt in Akkadian, a language of diplomatic prestige. Iron Age I, 1200 to 1000 BC. After the collapse of the great powers, Egypt, Hittites, Mycenaeans, small villages settled in the region. The Israelites emerged, settling in rural villages and mountainous areas of Canaan. Language of the Israelites, early Hebrew, considered a variant of Canaanite. Other neighboring peoples. Philistines, on the southern coast, they spoke a language with Indo-European roots, later adopting Canaanite. Phoenicians, on the northern coast, they spoke Phoenician, very similar to Hebrew. Moabites, Ammonites, and Edomites, east of the Jordan, their languages were almost identical to Hebrew. During this period, groups speaking Hebrew, Phoenician, Moabite, and Philistine already coexisted in Palestine, both in cities and rural villages. The second stage of the Iron Age, from 1000 to 586 BC, era of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Official and popular language, Biblical Hebrew. Inscriptions, such as the one from Siloam, 8th century BC, show a living and consolidated Hebrew. However, the Hebrews coexisted alongside Arameans in the north, Syria, Assyrians and Babylonians during the conquest, with their Akkadian languages. The society was mixed, cities with international trade and rural villages where Hebrew was better preserved. Hebrew flourished as a national language, but it was never the only one in the region. Persian and Hellenistic period, 586 to 63 BC. After the Babylonian exile, many Jews returned speaking Aramaic, which became their everyday language. Hebrew remained the language of liturgy, sacred scripture, and some texts. In the Hellenistic period, Koine Greek became the language of culture and administration. Palestine became a trilingual space, Aramaic in daily life, Hebrew in religion, and Greek in politics and commerce. Roman period, 63 BC, 1st century AD. In the time of Jesus, Aramaic was the most widely spoken language in villages and cities. Hebrew was used in the temple, in the scriptures, and in learned circles. Koine Greek was an international language, used in Hellenized cities like Caesarea. Latin was a residual language, used only by Roman authorities. In Palestine, Hebrew and Aramaic coexisted until, centuries later, Hebrew ceased to be spoken as an everyday language, remaining only as a liturgical language until its modern revival. As a conclusion from these data, we can say that the land of Canaan, later called Palestine, was from the beginning a place of coexistence of peoples and languages. Hebrew originated there as a variant of Canaanite and became the language of a people with its own identity, Israel, but it always shared a space with Aramaic, Phoenician, Greek, and many others. This cultural mix, far from diminishing its value, gave the region its unique character as a bridge between East and West. The rise of the Israelites. With the arrival of the Iron Age, around 1200 BC, the great empires collapsed. In the midst of this power vacuum, small groups settled in the mountains and rural villages. Among them were the Israelites, who spoke a Canaanite dialect that soon became established as ancient Hebrew. Alongside them lived the Philistines, of Aegean origin, settled on the southern coast, the Phoenicians, in the northern port cities. And on the other side of the Jordan, the Moabites, Edomites, and Ammonites. Their languages were so similar to Hebrew that, in some cases, they could understand each other. The Age of Kingdoms. Over time, the kingdoms of Israel and Judah emerged. For centuries, Biblical Hebrew was the language of daily life, poetry, administration, and faith. From that time, we have inscriptions such as the one from the Siloam Tunnel in Jerusalem, which still speak to us in ancient Hebrew today. But Hebrew was never alone. The Arameans to the north, the Assyrians and Babylonians in their conquests, and even trade with the Phoenicians, created a constant linguistic and cultural exchange. Exile and transformation. When the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem in 586 BC, many Jews were taken into exile. There, Aramaic became their everyday language. Upon their return, that language took root in Palestine. Hebrew remained, but was reserved for worship, writing, and the learned. Later, with the arrival of Alexander the Great, Koine Greek joined the linguistic landscape, becoming the region in a trilingual space. Hebrew in liturgy, Aramaic in daily life, and Greek in politics and commerce. The Roman era. The language of Jesus. In Jesus' time, Palestine was a true crossroads of languages. The majority of the people spoke Aramaic, Hebrew was preserved in the synagogues and the temple. Greek was the language of the cities and the Hellenized world, and Latin was barely used by the Roman rulers. Jesus himself, when teaching in villages and on the roads, spoke Aramaic. When reading in the synagogue, Hebrew, and when moving around Hellenized cities, he surely heard Greek. The land of Canaan, the region of the eastern Mediterranean, has always been a space of many peoples and languages. There Hebrew was born, Aramaic spread, and Greek resonated. Each language not only communicated words, but also worldviews, beliefs, and ways of understanding life. Israel is the only people who have demonstrated, through historical and biblical accounts and archaeological remains and the linguistic studios, their millennia-long belonging, their deep roots in their land, their hard-working hands, their cultural legacy, and, most importantly, the cradle of the Judeo-Christian principles that millions of us in the West adopt and practice, and which have been the model for establishing basic rights for all good people in Africa and Armenia. That's all for today. Thank you for coming this far. Blessings, and see you soon.